So from here, we can move on to the next talk of this session. So the next talk will be by Dr. Prashant Bhangue. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, the surname. And he's a very renowned surgeon at the Department of Liver Transplant and the Regenerative Medicine. He's a senior consultant there. And he'll be talking about a very important topic on the perioperative strategies for renal protection in liver transplant.
Thank you, Dr. Rakhi, for that kind introduction. Yes, you did get the name right. First of all, at the outset, I'd like to thank the scientific committee of the transplant hepatology course, Dr. Sehgal especially, for inviting me to give this talk on perioperative strategies for renal protection in liver transplant. Of course, being a transplant hepatology course, I'm going to try and achieve a balance in between something that is basic and something that's advanced. And at the same time, being a surgeon, I hope amongst hepatologists, I'm able to do justice to this topic. We all know that renal dysfunction is an increasing problem in liver transplantation today. And that's because more and more patients coming for liver transplant have pre-transplant CKD. That's a substantial burden of the post-transplant renal dysfunction and high short-term mortality. The MELD score system that we have adopted mostly in the West and now more and more in India as well for cadaveric transplant especially, selects patients with renal dysfunction. So there are more patients with renal dysfunction who are actually having liver transplants, and liver transplant recipients are surviving longer. So this leads to an accumulation in renal toxicity from immunosuppressive drugs, especially the CNIs, and therefore severe renal failure in LT recipients is associated with significantly reduced survival compared to those without. And that's the reason exactly why we are seeing now an increasing incidence of kidney transplantation after liver transplantation in recipients of liver transplant. Since I've been asked to speak on perioperative strategies, I think I would divide it into three parts: the pre-LT period, during transplant, and immediate post-operatively. And when you look at the pre-liver transplant period, I think what we are all looking at is optimizing liver function pre-op. Why do we want to do that? I'll come to that a little later. We're all aware that there is a large spectrum of renal disease in cirrhotic patients, ranging from acute kidney injury to functional renal failure to chronic kidney disease. And at the time of liver transplant, we at least have 20 to 25% of patients now with EGFR less than 30 ml per minute per 1.73 meters square. And if you look at functional renal failure, you're mainly looking at pre-renal azotemia, HRS-AKI, and non-HRS-AKI. Since we're addressing a lot of students and young hepatologists here, I think it's also important to know that the definition today of HRS has changed. There's a new classification now. We are moving away from the HRS 1 and 2 of the ascites club as well as the KDIGO classification towards HRS-AKI and HRS non-AKI, where the NAKI is further divided into HRS-AKD and HRS-CKD, and the definition of them and the criteria for them are as follows. But what is important is that renal failure in a patient with end-stage liver disease in the absence of identifiable cause of renal failure is actually what you would put as HRS in these patients. And why is it important? As I said in the beginning, that's because if you look at patients who have baseline kidney function, which is normal, versus those who have a bad renal function at the time of transplantation, there's a significant difference. In this particular study, it was found that the ICU mortality, hospital mortality, cumulative survival between the two groups, especially those who had a renal replacement therapy prior to transplant, was much, much higher as compared to those with a baseline good renal function. This is a meta-analysis of 20 studies. This is clinical outcomes after liver transplantation for hepatorenal syndrome. And if you look here, you'll see that the overall pooled results showed that there was a reversal rate post-liver transplant of about 83%. But at the same time, the probability of death at 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years was much higher in the HRS group as compared to the non-HRS group. Now, when we think of dealing with or managing hepatorenal syndrome prior to transplant, we need to know the role of precipitating factors. And usually there's always a bacterial infection or a large volume paracentesis or a GI bleed or acute alcoholic hepatitis, which become the tipping points for a patient going into a renal dysfunction. There is renal vasoconstriction, there's a worsening of the hyperdynamic circulation, there's cardiac dysfunction, ultimately giving rise to an increase in the renal vasoconstrictors, a decrease in the renal vasodilators, and finally leading to the syndrome of hepatorenal syndrome, which we all know is mediated primarily by these inflammatory mediators, IL-6, IL-8, TNF-alpha, VCAM, oxidative stress, and all of them ultimately are going to give rise to the HRS. Before you move on to treat HRS, first of all, make sure you're not dealing with something which is not HRS, and therefore exclude other causes of renal failure and cirrhosis, hypovolemia, shock, parenchymal renal disease, and concomitant use of nephrotoxic drugs. And you'll think of actual renal parenchymal disease if you have significant proteinuria or microhematuria, and the renal ultrasound today demonstrates abnormalities in kidney size, and you look even further, and now RI of the renal artery, just like you look at RI of the hepatic artery post-transplant, also can sometimes give you an indication. Now, treating HRS, if you look at the EASL practice guidelines, and this is from 2018, is based on vasoconstrictors and albumin. Why vasoconstrictors and albumin? If you look at terlipressin, it will take care of the portal hypertension and liver failure. It will act at this level to avoid this splanchnic arterial vasodilatation. It would also help in increasing the effective circulating volume. Albumin, with the prime aim of maximal increase in the effective circular volume, also has an additional effect. It increases your antioxidant activity and also helps to increase the SVR. So if you look at it overall, albumin 1 gram per kg per day on day 1, followed by 20 to 40 grams per day IV. Terlipressin 0.5 to 2 milligram every 4th or 6th hourly as an IV bolus, and I'll come to this continuous infusion a little bit later. Antibiotics in patients with proven infection, because remember, patients with SBP, 30% of them would develop HRS, and then the treatment would be treating them with albumin terlipressin, which is the treatment of HRS, plus treating the SBP. You need to prevent volume overload in these patients, and of course, you need to stop diuretics. Now, often this question is asked and posed to students and to senior members alike. What do you prefer? Continuous versus infusion versus boluses? And you will find that although there's no great difference in the response to either bolus or to continuous infusion, the side effects or the adverse effects are much lesser if you use an IV continuous infusion. And therefore, the tendency even in our unit today is to try and use 2 milligram or 3 milligram as an infusion over 24 hours. Now, why is it so important that I'm speaking about hepatorenal syndrome and what's its impact on liver transplant? It's because in those patients who respond to treatment of hepatorenal syndrome, in fact, their outcomes later on are much, much better. The probability of survival, as well as the cumulative incidence of chronic kidney disease. As is very clearly seen here, that response to terlipressin and albumin was one of the independent predictors of development of CKD during the first year after liver transplant. One very important group of patients, and I think this is a group that is being focused on more and more nowadays, is the group with ACLF. We see more of these patients, and most of these patients who come to us will come with some degree of renal dysfunction. This is a very nice study which was recently published in 2020, and it compared basically a non-ACLF group versus an ACLF group which had a high eGFR, more than 30, versus those who had a low eGFR, which was less than 30. And if you looked at the longitudinal renal function, you'll find that the recovery as well as the renal function in the long term is worse in the group of ACLF with a low eGFR. If you look at this figure again, you will find that if you see the probability of kidney composite outcome-free survival in those who are in the non-ACLF group, it was much better as those in the ACLF group, whether they were low eGFR or high eGFR. And among them, obviously, the low eGFR ones had the worst outcomes. This is a very nice randomized controlled trial, which was published recently in Hepatology by Professor Sareen and his group, which showed that even in this group of patients, probably terlipressin is superior to noradrenaline in the management of these patients with ACLF. So if I was to look at the pre-LT takeaway points, reversal of HRS by pharmacological treatment prior to LT may improve survival. History of HRS portends to a worse post-transplant renal function, a greater need for post-op hemodialysis, worse survival than patients without HRS, and be careful in those ACLF patients who are presenting to you with HRS. Now, often the other question that is asked is, suppose you have a CLD patient who comes to you with HRS, a creatinine of 3.5, what is the limit when you will take them for a transplant? And I think one important thing to realize here is that it has always been said that serum creatinine is not a great marker in these patients sometimes. It has a tendency to overestimate GFR, especially in patients with malnutrition and fluid overload. But all said and done, MDR-D6 probably is the best formula to use for eGFR in these patients. And what would I accept? I would accept if there is a downward trend, if there is a good urine output, usually less than 2 milligram per deciliter of serum creatinine, ideally less than 1.5. In some cases of ALS, ACLF, good urine output, no acidosis, downward trend is more important than an absolute value. And it's essential that you treat all the other causes of renal dysfunction. For example, the infection is something that needs to be treated before you take them up for a transplant. Now, what can I as a surgeon do during the transplant? And I think what's important to know is that the incidence of AKI after LT, if it ranges from 17 to 94%, it's because a lot of if you will develop AKI or not depends on perioperative events. Hemodynamic instability, ischemia reperfusion syndrome, primary dysfunction of the graft, the use of nephrotoxic medications, and vena cava clamping. So what a surgeon can do is that ensure that's a short and good surgery, reduce the blood loss, avoid sudden or prolonged hemodynamic changes and instability, and give a good antibiotic cover. What we practice in these patients, and we call it an intraoperative renal protocol, is side clamp the IVC. This is in the DDLT setting where you would side clamp and allow the IVC to flow. In the LDLT setting, again, here you see the right hepatic vein, the RHV stump there on the IVC. You would leave 2/3 or more of the IVC patent when you're actually implanting the graft. So during the entire period of implantation, you're leaving the IVC patent, avoiding a total clamping. What can the anesthesiologist do during transplant? And I think what they do, our practice has been to target a urine output of 0.5 ml per kg per hour. Usually they would prefer to use albumin diluted in plasma light and used at a concentration of about 4.1%. Terlipressin 1 milligram over 6 hours. You have to be careful, of course, in cardiopaths, those with high CVP, and they tend to use noradrenaline as a substitute in them. I would like to allude to these patients of ALF. Usually they have no role of terlipressin or albumin unless it's really low, or they use it only during reperfusion. But we have a tendency nowadays, and we found very good results. Those who have been on CRRT pre-LT, we continue it through surgery, especially in those who have high ammonia levels pre-LT and renal dysfunction. It is heparin Phe, ultrafiltrate is about 75 to 100 ml. And we haven't seen too much coagulopathy or hemodynamic instability. In fact, the hemodynamics are very, very smooth. So we practice side clamping and we continue the CRRT throughout the surgery in these patients. I'm not going to go into Dr. Dharmesh Kapoor's talk, which is going to be elaborate, but since I have been asked for immediate post-op, I would say that I have to say that CNIs is and are recognized as the cause of renal dysfunction post-liver transplantation, and mainly to do with the trough levels that are maintained or how early we start them. So people are moving away slowly from CNI-based regimen today, and the approach is to use induction therapy, use mTOR inhibitors, and use MMF. One of the first studies that showed this was in a group of patients who had normal renal function, and it was shown that if you use daclizumab, it was found that the mean change from baseline was least in these patients. And also, daclizumab induction with MMF corticosteroids and delayed reduced tacrolimus was associated with less nephrotoxicity than therapy with standard dose tacrolimus. It started from there. Basiliximab was the other one that is being used. And this is a very nice study, although non-randomized controlled trial, which showed that if you use basiliximab for induction, the need for RRT was reduced. Group 1 is the one with basiliximab. The ACR rates were slightly higher, but no significant difference, and lower infections and lower hospital stay in group 2. This is a paper that is actually published online. It's ahead of print. This is 2021. It's in transplantation. And this is where ATG has been tried with delaying calcineurin inhibitors. Again, finding that although there was no significant difference in between the effect on delta creatinine, yet they found that when it was used in CNI deferral patients beyond 10 days with a lower target tacrolimus level, acceptable safety and treatment efficacy. So I think the consensus has been that induction therapy combined with corticosteroids and MMF with reduced dose or delayed initiation of calcineurin inhibitors associated with superior renal function and a lesser need for renal replacement therapy than early initiation and standard dosing. mTORs should be avoided in the first postoperative month, but they can be started say 4 to 6 weeks later. And that is something that we have been practicing as well. And the strategy is particularly beneficial in patients with CKD who are beyond stage 3. So lots of studies, I think Dr. Dharmesh will go to these in detail, but this was how it started and then went on to the H2304 trial, which has shown even at 36 months that there was a superior renal function. This was used and transferred slightly into the H2307 in living donor liver transplantation, where we were one of the major contributing centers. Again, found that delayed results, 24-month results also much better as compared to using TAC alone. This is our study. This is our group, and we have sent this as an abstract to IITS. And we found that the BPAR rates were similar. This is early switch from mTOR to mTOR inhibitors for preserving renal function. And mTOR inhibitors discontinued only in 8 patients out of this total number of 104 because of significant proteinuria. So much better renal function with mTOR with low dose CNI. Finally, any other intervention that we can do immediate post-op, I think in the ICU, maintain a mean arterial pressure of about 65 millimeter of Hg and above. If the patient is hypertensive diabetic, they tend to like a slightly higher 70 to 75 millimeter Hg. Look at the renal artery RI, and then you can give terlipressin noradrenaline during the first 48 hours after the transplant. Try to get a normal SVR with good regional perfusion. No major role of albumin for this except in high volume brain output. So ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I think in pre-liver transplant situation, the liver does a lot of harm to the kidneys. If we are wanting to have a good liver function at the end of it, we need to have a smiling kidney for a smiling liver as well. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant. That was a very nice and elaborate talk. I had one question. What is your experience? You showed us very nice experience on acute liver failure being taken up on CRRT, continuation in the intra-op. What is your similar experience on acute on chronic liver failures on CRRT, non-oliguric?
So I think we have not tended to use CRRT during the transplant in ACLF patients, very limited experience. I think in ACLF, we still would rely upon the number of organ failures. Kidneys, we are still afraid. We are still afraid of taking a patient with more than 2 creatinine. And if you have a patient who has a creatinine of less than 2, downward trending, good urine output generally, even if he has required pre-operative renal replacement therapy or dialysis, we would tend to go ahead without doing an intraoperative dialysis in these patients. I think in ALF setting, the aim is a little bit different because it's helping you primarily from the ammonia point of view, from maintaining the hemodynamics point of view. I think we all know now, and there was a large study that was published last year, I think by Professor Niemann and group, that even in those patients who had renal replacement therapy pre-op and renal dysfunction, you can get through quite easily through the transplant without renal replacement therapy intraoperatively, because it brings along with it a lot of complications of coagulopathy, though we did not see it in our ALF patients because generally they are not the really coagulopathic patients per se. But then a lot of questions of coagulopathy, extra corporeal circulation during the surgery in these ACLF patients who generally have an underlying component of sepsis. So we've not really preferred it in ACLF patients.